All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another coffee chat of sorts, but actually this is a slideshow day. We like on Mondays to have a coffee chat with a local friend, and then on Fridays, and sometimes other times, we like to post a slideshow that takes you away for a little virtual travel. So today our virtual travel is going to be hosted by my good friend Lisa Anderson. Buongiorno, or should I say buonasera?
Buonasera, buonasera. Yes, it's definitely dark of night already.
So Lisa is my friend who I've known for almost, 25 years, and she lives in Piedmont in northern Italy, and she is in charge of so many of our wonderful Italian-based tours, and she is going to talk today about, I think, what we both feel is one of the best tours in our lineup, and that is the city of Venice.
Yes, which is absolutely stunning.
So what do you love most about this tour? I love, I put this tour together because I've always felt like too many people go to Venice and they leave going, I don't ever want to go back. I'm glad I saw it. I never want to go back. And I've always thought that was really a shame because yeah, okay, it's super touristy. It can be very, very crowded. But the reality is that that's what most people see. They just see the touristic stuff. They just see the crowds. But what they don't really understand is that Venice held a really important place in the history of Europe, particularly in the Middle Ages. And most people don't scratch beneath the surface. And I guess that's kind of what I think both of us are trying to get at with this itinerary, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Venice is magnificent and it's unique in the world. And yes, over tourism is a big issue. We should definitely talk about that. But it is so magnificent. If you can get past the massive crowds in the middle of the day when day trippers are coming in, and you actually stay there for a week and just take things slowly and get off the beaten path, it is truly an experience.
It really is. And we've kind of tried to combine some stuff that we do. Like both of us like to do kind of walking tours. We have local guides who take us to the back streets and to some of the museums. But the other thing I think is really fun is when we really actually get out and interact with the lagoon, because Venice is, I mean, everybody knows Venice is kind of an island. But what I don't think most people realize is it's surrounded by a shallow, really shallow lagoon that is protected from the open sea by like a long island. And that means that really the lagoon is kind of a character in the play as well. It has it has a presence. So we do a couple things. We do the excursion out into the lagoon. Personally, I love the thing that you introduced me to, which is the Row Venice class.
Me too. You know what? When we did that, I found one of our pictures today as I was floating through old photos. How many years ago did we do that? It was so long ago.
It was at least 10, I think. It was a long time
It was
ago.
at least 10 years ago, and it was so much fun. That was, I think, one of the funnest days I've ever had in Venice.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is because you and I both spent close to 25 years coming and going from Venice. I think we're not locals, but I definitely think the joke is I think a lot of locals think we're locals because we're there so much. But I think we've gotten to know the city in a really different way because I think even as a tour guide, when you go places just for a few days, but you keep coming back, you develop your habits. You have your favorite bars, your favorite restaurants, your favorite little like quirky things you do. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so we've kind of been professional temporary locals. So I don't know. I think that's why this is a really fun tour. So what I think we'd like to do today is we'd like to take all of you on a little virtual tour with us, just so you can kind of start to understand why we have this love for Venice. And it really is a misunderstood city. So Lisa is going to drive today. She's got a little slideshow to share with you.
Here we go. Let's see if I can put it up and on. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Okay. There we go. Can you see it?
Absolutely. There we go.
Okay, there we go. So, this is a 1-week tour, which really allows us to take our time and enjoy Venice. And we are starting with a glimpse of the Grand Canal with just some tour details. And do you recognize this, Sarah? I mean, this is basically when you get off at the train station, right? Which so many people come into Venice this way.
This is the first thing you see for most people that arrive in Venice, unless you're coming from the airport and coming by boat. This is the first thing you see. It's kind of the iconic view of Venice.
Exactly, with the vaporettos and the little rooftop terrace and the dome, because there are so many domes here. Okay, I'm leaving this on here, but I'm not gonna actually stay on there. St. Mark's. I mean, St. Mark is what Venice is all about. It's kind of the relics that put it on the map, because what do relics bring to a place?
Prestige, right?
Prestige and pilgrims, which
Yep.
equals money. So there we have the Winged Lion of St. Mark's and his book. And you know, actually, a fun little fact about Venice is when you see St. Mark represented with a lion in his book, if the book is closed, it was created in a time of war.
Yeah. And
And
if it's open,
I always love that. If it's open, it was a time of peace.
yeah. And I love, see, there's all these little kind of um, little factoids, little bits of knowledge that I think we both love to share that actually make a trip to Venice so much more interesting, because it's sort of like a secret decoder ring, right? You can walk around the city and you can start to see things and you understand, oh, I get where that was from and when that was from. And that just makes everything more meaningful.
Exactly. It really, really is. So I'm going to flip through these slides. And then if you want to jump in and add anything about places, then absolutely feel free, just cut me off. And starting with this is the customs building. And I said, day one, tour of the Grand Canal. So I'm going to flip through things and we're going to go through each day of the tour a little bit and then delve into some little side points. This is customs. And customs, Venice was a merchant city. That's how they built their wealth. And anyone taking their products into the Grand Canal had to go and pay their taxes. You know, the two sure things in life are death and taxes. Still true. And the Guggenheim collection. And this is one of the things I love about Venice is I think, the history that's there, the history that goes back, really even into the ancient Roman times. When we go out to the island of Torcello, there was actually a Roman settlement there, and then how it's grown up over the ages and how it continues to evolve. And there's some very, very modern things about Venice. And if you look at the fish, because that's really what it looks at like, and you can see the railway causeway coming into the city, which is one of the things that brought a lot of modernization there. And how, you were talking about the lagoon and how Venice was built in this lagoon, and there are all these river channels there. And that was really one of their strengths through the years is, the tide would go out and they could leave their enemies high and dry if somebody was trying to attack. And it's really one of the only cities in the world where you had this vast wealth, and their palace is, sort of pink and white and lacy and open. And it was sort of an invitation saying, look at how great we are. We don't need to build a big medieval wall. We know that we have the power and we can defend ourselves.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, because one of the first things that you really notice about Venice when you get there are kind of the obvious things that make it so different. I mean, one is it's an island, two, there's no cars, and three, there's no medieval walls, there's no fortifications. So that tells you either they just didn't worry about attackers, which is partially true, or they use the water as their wall, actually. Yeah.
They use the water as their wall. And you really see that here too. And you can see the riverbeds working their way through the canals. Okay, Sarah, this was one of your pictures, because we kind of got in here and we combined pictures. And I put this in because it's not there anymore. It came up in 2017, but it talks about the fragility of Venice and the impact of climate change and tourism, and the idea that we can still change these things. And that's one of the things that I think we really need to touch on, because Venice is a very fragile environment. But if we look at how it's built, when we thought back to the lagoons, and this is one of the other things that always amazed me, is when we go out into the lagoon one of our days and you see these low-lying islands, how did they ever think to build the way they did in Venice? And here you kind of see the structure and the cisterns and the different, Venice is built on a forest.
Yeah, well, in Venice, I mean, nobody does this because they want to. I think that's kind of one of Venice. Nobody would go, especially in the time that this was built. So they began construction on Venice around the time of Attila the Hun. So let's kind of think about, pre the year 1000. So 600 to 800 AD, we have all these invaders. You know about the barbarian invasions, the Goths, the Visigoths, but people forget about Attila the Hun. And these are the things that they were worried about. So it was not safe to live on the mainland. So what do you do if you absolutely positively want to be somewhere that barbarians can't get you? Well, they can't swim. So
you flee to the lagoon.
yeah, put yourself out into the middle of the lagoon. And it was kind of a necessity. They had no choice but to live in a place that would be really not appetizing for invaders, because most of these invaders from the north and from the east did not have boats. So if you go out into the lagoon, you're essentially safe, because nobody knows, if you're not from there, that that lagoon is actually super shallow. You can walk across it in most spots.
In fact, you can see here that the channel markers now, but it gives you an idea of those low-lying islands. And it was, they say the bishops of Padua actually encouraged people to flee to the lagoons. But how they got from those low-lying islands to this is really amazing. And it had to do with millions of trees and human pile drivers, right? Driving
Yep.
all of these pieces of wood in here. And so now I'm going to delve into some pictures that just are going to take us on a journey through Venice. And starting with a beautiful sunny day along the Grand Canal and just above the Rialto Bridge. And what do you think of, too, when you think of Venice? It's a city of contrast because it's on the water. So we get a little bit of fog. But that's one of the things that's actually reflected in the art over the centuries, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And I also think you can see all these people here are bundled up because we have done these tours mostly in the off season. And the reason we do them kind of in the wintertime, when like March is often when we do it, is because it's not just that it's fewer crowds, which is true, but I like that, the kind of moody quality. I like that you're at the foot of the Alps. It's cold.
Exactly. We're at the foot of the Alps.
In bikinis and beach, but actually Venice, for the most part, the rest of the year is actually cool, but you do get these beautiful, crisp blue sky days. So I think that March is just such a wonderful time to go because it does have sort of that, I don't know, it reminds me of like what you think of Casanova doing, sneaking through the back streets and all of that.
Exactly. And we're sneaking through the back streets, except this is one of the main drags just after closing hours. And this is one of the things I think that's important to remember is that, when things do close down in Venice, at the end of the day, most of the crowds go away. I put at the very beginning of the slideshow too, this picture of Venice, St. Mark's Square. This is a pretty extreme flood. And we don't see those that many times a year. Again, when we go out to the lagoons, we get to talk about the Moses Project, which has really helped sort of, it's supposed to save Venice from sinking to a certain extent. And it sets up, sort of a dam that comes up from the bottom of the lagoon to prevent this. But Venice does have more flooded days a year. But this is more typical, I think.
Yeah.
And the wintertime in Venice, if you look at the crowd down here, it's off season. It's not terribly crowded. It's a little bit chilly and it's glorious and sunny. And one of the things that, as we've done this tour over the last couple of years, I think we have eaten outdoors during the day at lunchtime on every tour because the weather is nice enough.
Yeah, I mean, Venice is kind of surprising that way. You can have rain, and that's why we typically don't run the tours kind of in November-ish, November and December. Those are kind of the times when you get a lot of rain, and you do get the Acqua Alta, but Acqua Alta is not as common as it used to be because of the floodgates, the Moses Project that we talk about on our day trip around the lagoon, because they can control the intake of the water. So yeah, so all of those pictures that you see of, Venice is sinking, well, it's a more complicated story than that. And typically, this is more what you see even in really quiet days in January and February.
Exactly. And this is the beautiful Doge's Palace. So that was, it really shows you how the finery of Venice, and not a defensive wall at their palace, the Doge, the leader of Venice, was just in this beautiful open palace, which has one of the largest open venues in the city. Do you remember how many people fit in this room?
Oh, it's an awful lot. I can't remember the number, but this is where they used to have they had like basically a democracy, which is really interesting because this is another one of the great sort of gifts of the city of Venice. It was an oligarchy, and so it was run as a quasi-democracy with all of these wealthy families where they voted. They voted on a leader. They never had a king ever. They had a leader that was voted, and he ruled until the end of his life. That was a very progressive form of government because they were not so influenced by the church. They were separated from the church in a way, and they were able to be self-governing and not let church policy influence them. The great thing about Venice in the past was the dollar. No, well, not the dollar, the golden coin. So that room is really quite a testament to their power, because what they did, they were also shipbuilders. And the way they could, I'm, as you know, an architect, and what amazes me about a space like this is how they were able to do this in, I think it was the 1300s. They were able to build something this big by making an upside down boat hull, which is like an early version of a truss. So that was something very, very advanced. And I think that is another piece of Venice that you don't understand if you just look at the kitschy like masks and you see it for an hour. This was one of the most advanced and wealthy cities in the world for a good chunk of time. And so you see a lot of things in Venice you don't see other places.
Absolutely. And, you know, the buildings in Venice were created to be light. They look heavy on the outside, but the inside, I mean, I remember being in this room that where the Grand Council met, and you can actually feel the floor vibrating a little bit. And one of my favorite things to do actually at the Palazzo Ducale, the Doge's Palace here, is that you can take sort of a tour of the ceilings underneath. You get to go on top of that or behind that roof and see where the paintings, which are again very light, they're not frescoes in this case, they're canvases. So that's very light, and it's a lot of, you know, framework. And you get to see, you know, we're talking about Casanova, I think in his Escape, it's been ages since I've taken that tour, but you really get to go behind the scenes in the palace. And if you're in Venice for more than 24, 48 hours, which is what most people do, you get to take tours like that, which are so much fun. And then, of course, St. Mark's, which, of course, we visit inside and out. And this is a historic view. And one of the things I always love to tell people at the beginning of the week is we're going through the city and we're going into museums, and they have a chance to look, even in shops where you can see historic paintings, to look at how it's changed and how it hasn't over the years. And Mark Twain described St. Mark's Basilica as a warty bug taking a walk.
Yep. Well, and it kind of looks like that, but I think the other piece of this that's quite interesting is that you don't see any other churches in the West that look like this. I mean, it almost looks like Disneyland. It's a architecture that is completely unique with all of these little domes, except if you go to the east, if you go to Constantinople, and even then, mosques don't really look like this. These have much higher kind of domes with a horseshoe kind of shape. So it's a really interesting piece of architecture. But the reason that's true is because Venice was not linked to Rome. It was linked to Constantinople. So you have a completely unique architectural style here you don't see anywhere else. This is, again, one of these points that people miss if they go on their own. You are seeing something, they call it Venetian Gothic architecture. It's something you don't see anywhere else, heavily influenced by Islamic architecture, by things that people saw in the Middle East. And they brought these in to create this fusion of East and West, which is really a lot about the culture and the architecture of the city. It is a little bit of a fusion of East and West.
It is really a fusion of East and West, and a lot of recycling that they did in Venice, or not recycling. We always kind of joke about that, don't we? But so many things were taken from Constantinople and brought to Venice. And then, of course, the saints' relics, this is represented. This is one of the oldest mosaics in Venice. It's actually one of the only original mosaics, I believe, that are left on the Church of St. Mark's on the exterior, which is a representation of St. Mark's body being smuggled out of Alexandria, Egypt, in a barrel of pork, I believe it was, because Muslims would not touch pork. And you can see the repulsion in the gesture, and you can see that Middle Eastern influence, because Venice did bloom from the Byzantine Empire.
Yes, and this is kind of the most famous story is that, you know, the Venetians, it is a little bit of a funny story. In the past, they had Saint Theodore. That was their patron saint. But as they became more and more and more wealthy, Saint Theodore, who knows anything about Saint Theodore? Probably nobody. His symbol is he rides on like a dragon.
Crocodile or dragon, yeah.
It's supposed to be a dragon, but it's a crocodile, right? So nobody knows about Saint Theodore. So these merchants, they felt pretty special. They felt like they were the masters of the universe, and they decided, well, Saint Theodore is not really good enough for us. So they looked back into the Bible to try to find something that would give them a reason to go and take one of the great four evangelists. These are one of the four most important people in the Bible. And they decided, well, I think I'm going to go and take one because, by the way, St. Mark, he passed through Venice for sure. And there is some sort of story out there that St. Mark did float through the lagoon of Venice. That might have been true. So they used that as their legitimate reason to go to Alexandria and procure the body of Mark and bring it back and put it into their church. And then they became almost not in any way on par with the Vatican, but it was a little bit of a way of snubbing the Vatican because now
Absolutely.
they powerful saint, and people had a reason to look at them as being not just economic power, but also a little bit of a religious power. But they were not connected to the Vatican. They were connected to the Eastern Orthodox tradition.
Sure.
So it was a little bit of a scandal when they did that.
Indeed it was. And they managed to monopolize on that and grow their wealth as sailors with their shipbuilding capability that you talked about. We're going to go to the Arsenale in a moment. And just look at the interior here in St. Mark's Square. All of that, in St. Mark's Basilica, excuse me, all of that gold is 24 karat gold. And another one of the really important and unique things that came out of Venice and its influence with the Byzantine Empire are the mosaics. And in the church, you really see an evolution of mosaics from the very, very oldest that were sort of that Byzantine style, which was supposed to be idealistic, to the more modern, renovated mosaics that definitely took on that Renaissance characteristic, right? Because we know that when Rome fell, and I don't have slides here to represent it, but the Romans created really beautiful and very realistic mosaics, even if we didn't get that three-dimensionality. Whereas the Byzantine world, the trend changed, and it was supposed to be idealistic. It wasn't supposed to be realistic. And of course, we know that technology didn't go away overnight. It's literally an evolution in the art. And then we have a representation of Venice herself. Of course, this is a beautiful, Our Lady Venice is always represented as a blonde with her pearls and her wealth. And she's holding the Doge's crown in her hand here. So this is the Venetian leader's hat, which is also represented in the Ferro of the Gondola. And I'm flipping through things a little bit more quickly here for you, but one of the things that the Republic wanted, La Serenissima, was that there were, if you needed to denounce somebody, this was the guy you would put the letter in his mouth and would find a box and anonymity. And if you didn't behave, this is where you would end up. So there were a lot of public messages that were sent around. People were also put into the columns in St. Mark's Square if they needed a really public punishment. But this is in the Doge's Palace, and these are the prisons. You cross the Bridge of Sighs. And then, of course, Venice, modern Venice, not quite modern Venice, but it can't be described without a little bit of Napoleon. Do the Venetians love Napoleon? What do you think?
I'm not sure anybody outside of France loves Napoleon.
I didn't even know that the French love Napoleon.
Yeah, I mean, even if he was from Corsica, so he's practically Sardinian, I don't think people love. I mean, I'm sure he is somewhat ethnically, vaguely Italian. No, nobody loves Napoleon. But the reason that he is so hated, there's two reasons. One, he marks the end of the Republic. So Venice was a republic, which is, again, very unusual in history, from about the year 800 to about the year 1800. And he brought about the end of that. So that's 1,000 years as an independent republic It was quasi-democratic. And so he came and he ended all of that because he took Venice and he wanted Venice to be his living room. That's how he talked about it. He wanted St. Mark's Square to be his living room. So he was building a palace when his reign ended. He was building his actual home so he could live in Venice and have the finest living room in the world. The big problem with Napoleon is he decided to take lots of the art that he found in Venice to Paris. And unfortunately, a lot of it is still in the Louvre today. So if you go and you see Veronese, for example, in the Louvre, a lot of that stuff was taken, and the Venetians would definitely like it back.
Yes, they would. And there's a big debate about that. I mean, there are battles that are still being fought. In fact, this is the very end of St. Mark's Square is the Napoleonic wing right at the very end, where there used to be a church. And this goes back also to looking at historic pictures when people are there, so that they can compare over time how things have changed and how they are still very much the same.
Yeah, and one of the most interesting ways that people are able to do this is a great example right here, is in the collection of Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth collected canalettos. And canalettos were kind of like postcards that people would buy, wealthy people, that is, during the Grand Tour. So the 17 and 1800s, these artists, but Canaletto most famously, would make these incredibly detailed depictions of Venice to sell to wealthy tourists. These are now being used as historical documents because they're almost photorealistic. And
they are amazing.
Yeah, historians have been able to go through and figure out, oh, the water level is higher or lower than it used to be, or this church changed once Napoleon came. So it's a really interesting thing that we're able to have kind of a record through painting.
Exactly. And here you're looking at the Arsenale, or one of the entrances to the Arsenale. So this was one of the sources of Venice's wealth through its ships. And they say the Venetians were actually able to, I think it was around 1300, create a complete ship from raw material to crewed ship in 24 hours if they needed to.
And you know who the only other power on earth to be able to do that is, right?
Henry Ford? No.
The American military during World War II. So there's only been 2 world powers in history that were able to complete a warship in 24 hours.
In 24 hours.
Yeah, the Venetians, and this is back at about the time of, I think it was Louis the Eighth, or no, sorry, Louis the 14th, I want to say. I think that was one of the kings of France. They built a ship for him in one day and then flew him down the Grand Canal. And it's interesting that those are the only 2 major world powers that were ever able to do a warship in a day.
And they incentivized their soldiers, they incentivized their sailors by giving them a tiny bit of berth space, so that as they were away on their missions, they could actually buy things and come back as merchants and hopefully earn a little extra money on the side. Okay, here we're looking at the Rialto Bridge, which is one of these places that when Venice is terribly, terribly crowded, this can be an absolute zoo, but it's also a beautiful bridge. And this was the financial, or my words are leaving me right now, Sarah. What is going on? It was the marketplace. And here is a historic picture, again, going back, so that you could see what it was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And it was a wooden bridge up until, was it about 1500? I don't remember the exact date on the bridge.
Yeah, and what's really funny about that, go back to that other picture you showed of the Rialto in the past. So it was a wooden bridge, but the reason they replaced it is that it collapsed because too many people were on it at once. And this is what I always like to tell people when they lose their minds about how crowded Venice is. There's over tourism. We don't like having these people from all these different countries in our city. I mean, I hear this from Venetians sometimes, and I understand their frustration. I do, and they're not wrong. But what I always like to say to that is, maybe go to the Accademia and have a look at some of these Carpaccio paintings and some of these other paintings that show how crowded the Rialto was. If you were there during the 14 and 1500s, the population of Venice now is less than it was in the 14 and 1500s.
Oh, it's less than half as much. Absolutely. I think it's about 50,000 people that live there today. And I think it was about 120,000 back then.
Yeah, so there were so many more people that lived in Venice in the past. And if you look at the faces of the people in these paintings, they are not all white Venetians. They're not all blonde and blue-eyed Venetians like you see today. These are people from all over the world because there was a Greek quarter. You know, there was a quarter where merchants from Africa and Germany and all these other countries lived. So it was multicultural. It was a
Absolutely.
multicultural city before we even knew what that was. So that's why I always think when people complain about tourists today, I always say, well, it's just giving you more historical accuracy.
It absolutely is. And in fact, look at all the people on the bridge. You could understand why it collapsed.
Yep.
Okay, going through another day. So we've just flipped through a couple of days of our tour there. I should move along, I guess, a little bit. Day 3, we really dedicate ourselves to the art in Venice and the Accademia Museum and the Scuola Grande di San Marco, where, you know, Venice basically until the Renaissance. In the 1400s, the Renaissance started in Florence, then moved to Rome, and then came up to Venice, essentially in terms of time. And we roughly put it around 1400. And this is when art really started to change in Venice, because we went from the Byzantine art that we saw before, and then we're starting to get into this amazing, very realistic, but also with that Venetian haze, with the Bellini. And then we have Giorgione, who was a very short-lived but amazing painter, and we're going to be exploring that. And Titian, I mean, Titian was probably one of the longest living and most amazing painters. He's one of my favorites personally, and this was the last painting he did for his funerary monument. It never went on his funerary monument in the Accademia gallery in Venice, that he painted with his fingertips, and he was nearly blind by the time he did it. And while it's not a beautiful picture of this, I think you get an idea of the scale and what was going on at the time, and it is really amazing. And you see Venice here, and you see representations of things in the city in this painting. So we're really going to start to look at that. And here, you know, Paolo Veronese, and this was originally supposed to be a Last Supper, wasn't it?
It was, but it was so scandalous that they had to come up with another name for it. So it's kind of
Exactly.
yeah, the dinner at the house of Levi or Levy.
Yeah,
Yeah, and they
exactly.
did that because I mean, if you look, it's a really weird little painting. It's got German soldiers and they were Protestants, and it's got little dogs and all these improbable things that would have never been at a Last Supper. And so when he was about to finish it, the monks who ordered it were like, yeah, that's not okay.
No,
we
I
don't.
think in fact, wasn't he called in front of the Inquisition board?
Yeah, he was. And so how do you fix that problem? Well, I mean, today we would call it rebranding. Let's rebrand.
Did a
Let's
great
fix the
job of
problem.
rebranding.
Yeah, but the thing that's neat about this painting, and this is true of most Veronese paintings, is that this artist painted at enormous scale. So this takes up the entire wall of one
Exactly.
of the Accademia Museum, and it's really, really impressive. Especially, I think if you look at this and you don't have any artistic expertise, you're going to kind of walk away because it's too much and you can't quite understand what it's a Last Supper, whatever, and you walk away. But what's really neat is when you have an excellent local guide, and we have excellent local art experts that join us for our tours, they tell you all the details and the funny little stories between each of the people. Oh, look at these people over here, they're talking, and here's who they were historically. Because a lot of times these artists use real people that they knew. They're using clothes that they saw on the street, and there's always a reason. You never see anything in art that's not there for a reason, but we don't know the reasons because we are not from that time. And that's what I think is so magical about taking a tour versus seeing things on your own, because you have an artist, an art historian, who can look at that and say, okay, let's look at this detail. Let me show you why that's interesting. I mean, I can tell you one funny little one. You can kind of see hidden amongst the men, there is a woman, right? So that begs the question, who is she and why is she there? There was not a woman at the Last Supper. So it's all these little kind of quirky things. I'm not going to tell you the answers because you got to go and see it for yourself when you're there. But there, and also look how the background of this Last Supper is Venice.
It
That's
is
what,
Venice.
yeah. Why did they put it in Venice? You know, what are they trying to say about Venice by putting a Last Supper there? I think that that's a very interesting political message. So this is why coming to Venice with a tour guide, because I know a lot of people might think, oh, spending that 7 days in Venice with a, you know, why would I do that? It's that we have particular knowledge that is so fun to share with people. And I love when you and I get to be storytellers, and our local guides as well, because people walk away and they go, oh, actually, that makes a lot of sense. That
It does,
explains.
because you learn so much as you're going through and actually seeing things in context. I'm going to go back for a second, actually, to the Bellini that we were looking at, because Titian pays reference to Bellini in this painting. And then if we go back here with our angels, oh, maybe I don't have the one I thought I did. I apologize. But, you know, Giovanni Bellini was so important in the technique of oil painting and the sacred conversation, la sacra conversazione, where the iconography in paintings actually changed. And then the last painter, this is just highlighting things that we see in the museum, but we very rarely see women painters. And Rosalba Carriera was a very prolific, but she did these sort of postcard, you know, Canaletto style things that a lot of people walked away with from Venice. And it's nice to see a woman represented for a change, isn't it?
It is. But actually, fun fact, women had a place in Venetian society at a time when women did not have rights really anywhere. And the most powerful women, who were those? They were the courtesans.
They were the courtesans. They were very highly educated, exactly. Usually great writers, musicians, entertainers, conversationalists, absolutely. Well read.
Yeah,
Here we
so
go.
I think it's just interesting that Venice, you can't really think about Venice like any other city in the world at the same time, because they had a lot of freedom. It was a much more progressive city. Also, like I said, because they weren't as tied to religion as other cities were, I think.
Yeah, much and a very cosmopolitan city. Okay, one of the other things, of course, that we always think of when we think of Venice is what? The gondola. And so here we're looking at the Forcola, which is still an art here. And of course, we have to go on a gondola ride when we're in the city. Here it's a little chilly, but absolutely wonderful. Would you like to be serenaded?
Are you going to sing for me?
No, my voice isn't quite up to it tonight. And you know, there's history in the gondola, and the gondolas used to actually be different colors until it was kind of like, you know, my red Ferrari. Well, no, Doja said we're going to have it all be black. And then the ferro, this iron piece at the end of it, is actually representative of the sestieri. We haven't talked about the sestieri yet, but all the different neighborhoods in Venice. And so you have the six sestieri, the Doge's hat, and then the one little piece going off towards the gondola, which represents the Lido, which I would say was the Australia of Venice. It was where, you know, minor prisoners were sent, and there was some industry over there. And
I've never
so,
heard anybody refer to it as the Australia of Venice. That's very funny.
yeah, exactly. It was the land of exile, but it wasn't very far away. There's some actually pretty amazing places there. Okay, and when we're going through, you know, Venice is meant to be seen by boat, of course. There are so many canals, and there were actually far more canals in the past than there used to be. And then, you know what, you took this picture, I think. It reminds me of a painting kind of in the Guggenheim, because again, there's a great modern art museum there, the Peggy Guggenheim collection. Doesn't it kind of remind you of the Magritte?
I love that you say that, because I took this picture with the intention of trying to replicate that painting.
I love that. You did a great job, because that's exactly what I thought.
I've
And
often
then,
thought that these two, this is so funny you picked these two out of all the slides I sent you, because these are two photos that I'm super proud of. I don't know why, but I was just really on one night when I was taking pictures. But you know what? That's the cool thing about Venice, wandering around at night when there's nobody around. If you're a photography enthusiast, it's like a playground. It's really fun.
it really is, and it is absolutely beautiful. Okay, who's this?
That is Vivaldi.
Of course, it's Vivaldi. Beautiful Four Seasons. He was a priest and
What?
known for his. Vivaldi was a priest, yeah. I don't think he ever preached, but he left some beautiful music. And I think one of the things that a lot of people, here's Vivaldi a little later in life, really appreciate when they're in Venice is having the chance to go to a concert in the evening. That's another thing, you know, when you're just there for a night or two, you don't have as many choices. And here you really have the chance. And the churches in Venice, a lot of them have some really wonderful musicians, and they play all year long, and they are beautiful. concerts, and you're sitting, in these very, very ornate churches, and it is a beautiful venue to listen to a lot of music that was actually written there. And then, of course, the Casino di Venezia. There are a couple of words, casino and casino. You know what this was? It is a casino, a house of gambling, and of course, there would have been prostitution. And it's just a beautiful building. So this is just one of the many things that you'll see when we do our tour of the Grand Canal at the beginning as well. And now we're switching.
the one,
What?
the word that started all casinos.
Exactly. Casino and casino. Okay, so are you ready to go to the islands?
Yeah, and this, I have to say, is one of my favorite parts of the Venice tour, is when we get to go out onto the islands, because it's a different world. I mean, especially if you're in Venice on a really busy day, going out to the islands, you just get to see a totally different lifestyle. And a lot of people who work in Venice will actually live out on the islands. So we do a different selection of islands every time, but we try to make sure that everybody sees a little bit of a different character of the islands.
Exactly. And one of the things that, so we were with all the pretty colored houses earlier, and it's the town of Burano. It's a little village. It's still very much lived in, and it's a very blue collar community. And over the centuries, lace making became very, very important there. In fact, royalty would arrive, and royalty and nobility would arrive for the lace that was made on the island, because, it's an island of fishermen. And when the men were out fishing, the women would be making lace. They were so good at repairing nets, they took it to a higher level. It's a very elaborate net. And there's a wonderful lace museum on the island of Burano, and its colored houses are so pretty. And then Torcello, which is, that's it's the oldest settlement, actually, that was, it predated Venice. There was a Roman settlement here, and then this church and the baptistry were built up in the 600s. And before Torcello was basically dismantled and moved to the Rialto area in Venice, it had a population, they say, of about 20,000 people, which is really hard to imagine now when you go out there, because it's so quiet.
I think they have only a dozen people who live out there now, but part of the reason they moved was because it had a lot of mosquitoes in the past.
Yes, they did. Malaria. And one of the highlights of this day, I think, also, besides just going to the islands and wandering around, is the Cipriani, Locanda Cipriani, where we go and have lunch. And so this is actually late February of a couple of years ago. Look at that day.
It's how nice the weather can be. And the Cipriani, well, this is kind of true of all of our tours. I guess I have this strategy when I travel of trying to do what I call strategic elegance. We don't stay in 5-star hotels that cost $1,000 a night, because we want to make sure that our tours are affordable. So we stay in really nice hotels, but we don't splash out unnecessarily. But where we do splash out is that we make sure that we have at least one really nice, fancy experience. And this is our fancy experience on the Venice tour, because this is the hotel that Princess Diana stayed at, for example. And they do this incredibly elegant lunch with silver service and waiters with gloves, and but it's outdoors, it's al fresco. It's one of the most beautiful dining experiences in Italy, in my opinion. I just think it's really such a lovely way to feel a little pampered, but also to have a unique experience. So this is kind of our feature meal on this tour.
It really is. And even if we were not blessed with beautiful weather, the inside, there's a gorgeous old fireplace, and it's really, really cozy. So even if you didn't have a really gorgeous day like I've always had, it would not be a bad place to have lunch. And you see the church behind you. This is this is the oldest church in the lagoon, but it looks very plain on the outside. It has giant stone shutters. Those bottle. I don't think. Can you zoom in? No, you can't really see it if I zoom in on that. But that sort of bottle shaped window, the different single round glass panes that were invented in Venice. It looks like a bottle bottom, because Venice was built on the water, and so they needed to be flexible. You didn't want a big pane of glass, which was incredibly expensive, and then with the shifting of soil, It would move. And then the inside of this church, it would break, excuse me, has these gorgeous Byzantine mosaics. So remember going back to St. Mark's, where we talk about there are some Byzantine style mosaics there, but most of them were more modern, more Renaissance and Baroque in style. But these, you really see the idealism. And this is what happens if you did not behave in the past. This is the last judgment that is actually, look at the details here. This is Dante.
I love this so much. I love sitting and dissecting this when I take my groups in there, because it's so weird and so funny. If you look at there's the Antichrist, but you honestly don't see very much. The little baby Jesus sitting with the devil. And what I think is, yeah, and you can see all of the souls that have been damned. Look at how they're all rich people. They're all kings.
They are, you're right. They have crowns and turbans, lots of wealth.
Which is a really unusual message. And consider that the people who are paying for this are people who are merchants. They're not kings, they're not princes, they're not clergy. Those are the people they're putting into hell. And so that's kind of an interesting, unusual aspect, because you don't see that typically in art from this time period. And the other thing I like is this shows the direct connection between Byzantium and the West, because you can see up at the top those angels with their really elegant robes. Those are things you would have seen in Byzantium at the time, because the craftsmen were coming from Constantinople to do this work. And so they thought that saints and noble people, saints and like famous religious figures, would be dressed like the noble people they sought in Constantinople. So it's kind of an interesting connection, because there's a lot of Greek Orthodox Eastern Church imagery in this that you wouldn't see outside of Venice. You would never see this in a mosaic, let's say in Rome, because this is the Eastern interpretation of Christianity, which is really fascinating. So I love to stand in here with my group. I'm in here usually for at least a half hour, 40 minutes explaining this mosaic, because it is such a strange East meets West combination, but also with all these little clues about who paid for it, which was a non-traditional community at that time,
Yeah. And it's interesting because, before this church was founded, you have the Eastern Byzantine Empire, which was really thriving in Ravenna, which was the western seat of the Eastern Byzantine Empire. And then Venice came to power, and Ravenna kind of slipped into its own world where you can see beautiful mosaics. And here are these gorgeous floors, which are all recycled pieces of ancient Rome.
Yeah, I think these are kind of fun to look at, because it reminds you that there was a Roman city, but it was never in Venice. Venice was never a Roman city. There was never any, because there's nothing there, not until probably about the 500s or 600s before people actually started moving into the lagoon. But along the lagoon, there were very famous Roman cities. In fact, like there you have Altino. That's the one that they talk about, the ancient Roman city that eventually became Venice, because the people who lived in that city fled to the lagoon, and they took their city with them. They took all the pieces of their city with them, and then they reassembled it into something new.
Exactly. And Padova, which is just a stone's throw away. And Verona. And I mean, those really relatively close by.
Yeah.
Okay, back to the main part of Venice. I think Venice has one of the most beautiful hospitals ever. So looking here at this very ornate building butted up against the church is a hospital, and one of the Scuola Grande. So we didn't talk about the schools, but these were confraternities. These were basically, where the different merchants of the city could get together to have their say in the republic that was Venice at the time. And so this particular Scuola Grande, big school, that's not a good translation, is it? But it was a confraternity, and is now Venice's hospital.
They were basically, a scuola was kind of like a guild. It was a little bit like a union, like a labor union, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
Kind of a politically weighted labor union. And the other thing that's very funny about this, by the way, is you look at that and you go, that's their hospital. That doesn't look big enough for a hospital. It is enormous. That's just the entryway, but it's this very modern building. So they just attached this old building, historical building, to a huge modern complex. It's actually a very modern, very nice hospital, and it goes for blocks and blocks in every direction.
Yes, I'm sorry to say I've been there a few times with people over the years.
Both of us. Oh,
So we,
Michele. Oh, you
it's
get to talk about Michele.
Michele.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I
This
love him.
again is one of the most fun things in Venice because you know when you're going to the market, you're looking through everything. You're just like, I want to cook. I want to cook, and we do this magnificent cooking class. And if the group is small enough, actually, we're in his house, which was I think it built in the 16th century, very modern on the inside, but it's a historic building. And he is a great chef. He used to be a chef at the Bauer Hotel, and he is so much fun. This is just kind of his second coming, and we make the most amazing meal using fresh fish and the vegetables that Venice is known for. And I don't know, I love going and cooking with Michele, and I've learned a lot from him as well.
He always teaches me something that I didn't know. Like I actually learned how to vein shrimp more efficiently from him last time I was there. So you get these kind of fun tips and tricks. I know nobody's probably going to go out and buy octopus and try to prepare that in their home. Maybe you will, but
I
I
would.
think okay, well you would. I don't know. It's harder to find here in the States, but I think it's really fun to go and see very elegant cooking. But the thing I've always loved about Michele is that he loves to get us involved, but he
Hmm.
also is like a five-star restaurant chef. And so you get essentially from a cooking class a five-star restaurant meal, which
Exactly.
if you've ever done cooking classes before, you know that's not normally how that works.
No, and it's hands-on, but if you don't love to cook and you get a little tired along the way, you can sit down and just kind of relax and he makes sure we're all taken care of. So it's a really nice combination for both people who love to cook and people who just love to eat.
Well, I remember so fondly this time I took a group to a cooking class, and not this one, but in Rome. And there was a woman who was older, and she said to me, "I don't understand why you're taking us to a cooking class. I'm forced to cook at home all the time. This isn't fun." And I remember that comment. This is many years ago, and that's why when we do our cooking classes, I really love it to be that either you could participate or you can drink wine and watch. It's your
Exactly. It's a good choice to have. Okay, here we're getting up to our last day, which is learning to row. And this is what we were saying at the beginning. We did this years ago together. Wonderful organization called Row Venice, where, you know, this is a Coda del Gambero is the name of the boat. It's not quite as wobbly as a gondola, which is good. And we start by learning on the shore, but we actually do get out in the canal. And there you go, Sarah. You remember that?
Oh yeah, that was a while ago.
And you learn how to pull your oar in, and we spent a couple of hours. It's a really, really good fun. And along the way, we stop for something else we haven't talked about in Venice. But Venice, you know, is known for its cicchetti. And these are these wonderful little bar snacks. There's so much variety. I don't know how many types of cicchetti I've seen just wandering around the different cicchetterie in the city. Probably at least 70 different combinations over the years. What would you say?
Oh, I think it's infinite. And this is truly the way to eat in Venice. I know a lot of people say, oh, Venice has terrible food. The food is not good.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's so good.
at the tacky touristy places, yeah, but that's not how I eat. And I don't think that's how you eat. I mean, typically, if I'm in Venice, I don't want to go for a 3 or 4 hour sit down meal. What I usually love to do is hit up one of the baccari, which is these kind of like really old fashioned wine bars. And you go in and a lot of them are just mostly locals, especially if you go into quieter parts of town, and they
Hmm.
have of all of these different little nibbles. They're a little bit like Venetian tapas. They have the cod that's on toast. They have
Hmm.
the little salad with the cheese and anchovies. But there's all it's not just all seafood stuff too, though. There's a lot of interesting choices. You can make an entire meal without a problem, and it'll cost you. Oh, I don't know. I think I've often spent less than $10 on a glass of wine and a dinner doing this. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe a little bit more now, but yeah, that's about right. You go get an ombra. This is a little bit bigger glass of prosecco. Of course, prosecco is really important to the region as well. But you go get an ombra, a little shadow, a little glass of wine, and they have, you know, wine on tap, but it's just good solid house wine. They usually have a whole bunch of different types, and then they have fancier stuff in a bottle, and really just good food. And I love you said the bacala, the cod. This is bacala matacata, which is one of my favorite things. I always have it when I get to Venice. So let's look at a little of the food that we're going to enjoy over the week. the fresh seafood, the Rialto market, right? We have a chance to wander around because our hotel is actually about 10 minutes away, and it's known for its fresh seafood and then the elegance of the dessert that we get when we're at the Cipriani, and look at the wonderful seafood combination there. This is one of, actually, when I do go to a restaurant, one of my favorite things to get if I'm, dining more than getting cicchetti is antipasto misto
Yeah.
with fish, and that's my meal.
I would also like to just point out again, if you're not a seafood lover, don't worry.
There's plenty of stuff that's not seafood. I know. I don't have a lot of food
I know a lot of
pictures
people
here today.
Ooh, I want that, but a lot of people will go I could eat that stuff. Don't worry, we always have other choices. So I don't assume everybody loves fish, but if you do love seafood, you really have an enormous choice, and you're going to see things on the menu that you would never see at home. So that's what's really fun, is if you're interested in seafood, you'll get to try some things that maybe would not be typical anywhere else.
And you do, I don't have pictures of them, but you have, the pasta alla seppia nera, which is very, very black, but good and kind of briny tasting. And the sardine sour, because you do kind of get some interesting connections with Middle East. There was a huge spice trade too that would come through Venice historically. And you do see a lot of that in the food that you're not going to see here. You're going to have to just come with me to try things. And of course, one of the things we've done with this tour, especially this year, because of, it was a combination of, tourism trying to keep from being the crowds, but finding the right time of year to go. So we're going right after Carnival. So if somebody really has, Venetian Carnival, it's the second largest carnival in the world over Rio. You can come and spend a few days in Venice beforehand, and you can, rent a fabulous costume. Have you ever done that?
No, but I want to. And actually, that's one of our little side projects, is doing a Carnivale tour someday. I don't know when it's where we can actually go and do like a Venetian carnival ball. I do want to just preface that by saying Venetian people don't actually do this. This is entirely.
No, exactly. It's tourism at this point.
So yeah, I don't know any Venetian person that has a costume like this in their closet. And a lot of Venetians choose to leave Venice during Carnivale because they don't want to deal with the tourists. But
I hear that.
But it is a lot of fun, and it is a very famous party, and it's kind of a big deal. So yeah, so that is something fun. And if you could come early, there are even balls and things like that that you can participate in. So if you want to do that, that would be an awful lot of fun.
And the mass, actually, because Carnival, back in, especially in the 1700s and early 1800s, Venice was sort of falling from its pedestal, losing its wealth, or spending, really blowing its wealth. But Carnival was a really big deal, which you can see in a lot of paintings too when we go to the Accademia. And the mask on the left, with the guy in the hat, the bauta, was one of the most popular masks, because it was the one mask a man could wear and eat and drink with. And then women had all these wonderful masks. And so mask making is a tradition that's really come back, the real Venetian masks, not made in China, but paper mache. And there are a lot of really great artists in the city that make these beautiful masks. And so there is the glory of the Venetian Carnival. And then the plague doctor, coming out of COVID, this is my reminder for that we came through an epidemic a few years ago. But, the plague had a massive effect on all places really in Europe, starting in the middle of the 1300s. And the plague doctor became one of the most famous masses, with this beak where they put, garlic and different herbs that actually have been proven to have sort of an antibiotic property. And they would wear this big cloak. This was literally what the doctor wore. They'd have glasses to protect their eyes, and a hat, and a stick that they could go and prod their, the patients with, because at that point, basically, they were goners. This painting is from 1616, but this was a historic costume in Venice, and an important reminder of, even then they were masking up. Huh?
Well, and I think the funny thing about the plague doctor is they were kind of right.
They were right.
Yeah, poking the patient with a stick, maybe not so nice, but the actual mask, that's kind of, I would bet that's more effective than today's medical masks, like the N95 masks, because they would completely seal their face and then have all the herbs and things in. So it was basically like a filter. So that was really smart.
Yeah, because they were covering their eyes, which is, mucous membrane, nose and mouth. Absolutely. And then, so this church, La Salute, where there's a fourth bridge in Venice. I haven't really talked about bridges in Venice, and we're not going to go into too much detail, but they build a bridge once a year to cross over to this church, La Salute, which was built to give thanks for saving Venice from the very last plague that came through in the middle of the 1600s. So this is a very important and beautiful church here on the Grand Canal. And then we didn't really talk about glass making. You know, we looked at the mosaics and whatnot, but Venetian glass is so important, and glass and glass beads, and it just, you know, it happened to be one of those art forms that came from the connection with Byzantium and the Eastern, the Middle East. But Venice had everything that they needed to create beautiful glass, because they ended up being, you know, this massive trading power with with access to different minerals and colors that they could bring in from all over the world. They had forests, which in the past would fire the kilns, and actually the island of Murano, which is where glassmaking was moved to, because, you know, a lot of the buildings in Venice are actually made out of wood. Now, of course, everything's gas, but it is still a very important industry in Venice, and some of it's a little heavy. I wouldn't want to put that in my house, but I really appreciate the craftsmanship here. So this is something we look at. And then, Sarah, do you want to talk about the Biennale before we finish up?
The Biennale is a really famous art show. It will not be on in 2025. It's every other year, so it'll be on in 2026. But you can still go down to the Biennale Gardens and you can walk around. They have all of these very interesting pavilions done by architects that represent different countries, and they show a lot of art in them. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the Biennale, go to my YouTube channel. I have 2 different videos from a couple of different years showing off the art display. So you'll have to join us in 2026 if you'd like to go and visit the Biennale.
Perfect. And you do get modern art from all over the place, Sarah. I don't think the hands are still there, are they?
Yeah, they are. And
are they?
When the very first night, when you do the taxi boat tour, because that's how we kick off. We actually kick off in style. We rent a taxi and we have our driver take us all around. They'll take you by there and you get to see that sculpture. That's Lorenzo, what's the last name? I can't remember his last name. Anyway, it's a famous Italian artist, and that hand bridge, it's the same artist who did the hands holding
the
up.
hands holding it up. Yes, I know. I have to look back. I know. I want to.
Yeah, so you do get it
or something. I've lost you.
Nope, I'm here.
Oh, there we go. Okay. And with that, we're going to the Lido, which we're certainly not going to do in March, but, well, maybe. You can go to the beach. It's not going to look like that. It's probably going to be a little bit chillier.
Bring a coat.
And there we are, just the sounds of Venice.
Well, and this is the thing we do include, by the way, the gondola ride. I know it's cheesy. I know it's silly. I know it's cliche.
So much fun.
It's so much fun. And it is one of the things that is not overrated. It may seem like it, but it's not. And we always try to do it in the evening. We try to do it so that you have an opportunity to kind of see the back streets of Venice and really get to understand Venice the way it should have been seen, because had you visited at any other time in history, that's basically how you would have seen the city. So, well, my friend, I think it has been a delightful slideshow. Thank you so much for taking us all around Venice and showing us what you love the most. So I hope those of you who have watched, you've gotten a little virtual travel in Venice. And if you're going to travel independently, I hope this will inspire a better trip for you. But those of you who are interested in traveling with me or Lisa, please go ahead and look at adventureswithsarah.net, and you'll see our tour offerings. This year for 2025, we'll be offering it in March, and there are spots available. It is well worth it. I think it's a really interesting deep dive into a city that is, I think, terribly misunderstood. And I would really, just as a mission for me, I want people to love Venice. I really do, because I think too many people, even if you've been to Venice and you're like, it's not for me, I think we can make it for you.
I think we can too. I think people love the week in Venice, and I would love to see you there.
Yep, I think that would be fantastic. Well, thanks so much for everybody for joining us. We are going to have other slideshows up here. We're going to be working all winter on presenting not just slideshows of our tours, but also of destinations that you might have never thought about in art and history. So we're always promoting learning something new. So please, I hope you learned something new today, and you'll learn something new with us tomorrow or any day that you want. And please visit my YouTube channel, which is, I think it's Adventures with Sarah Murdoch. Have a look at our YouTube channel, and there's so many more things with Lisa, with me, and any of our guides. So thanks so much, Lisa, for presenting this today.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll see you soon. Next up is going to be Sardinia, huh?
Okay. Ciao, everybody.
Wonderful. Ciao.